let's talk about sanding. Not everybody's favourite thing, but really essential. And for me, I don't think there's any piece of furniture that I haven't sanded in some way. Even if you're looking at something like a laminate or Formica, I'll even give that a scuff sand. Everything you can do like that is going to help your paint or finish stick, especially when you're using masking tape design. That is going to test how well those products are stuck, and you're literally pulling back. So getting a good key, getting your surfaces prepared well, and sanding well is really important. And also your technique for sanding. So I'm going to show you that as we go through. So what I've got here are, I've got 4 different grits of sandpaper here. Don't worry about the different colours, they're just different brands. And actually also they might look a bit strange because they're in a roll, and that's just how I buy them, because I buy them in bulk. But you've probably seen them in sheets. It's really important to say though, you get what you pay for in terms of sandpaper, and the cheaper stuff will get clogged quicker and wear out quicker and just go in the bin quicker, so you'll go through more of it. So spend a little bit more on a brand name, and it will be beneficial in the end. So I've got them on a roll, which can be quite handy actually for me, because I can use them for both hand sanding, and then I can use them on an electric sander like this, so they actually, sections of it can clip on the bottom. So they're pretty handy to have like that. In the supply notes for the course, I suggest 3 is all you need actually. But just to give you an idea, we've got a fine sandpaper here. So this is a 180 grit. We've got a sort of fine medium, which is 120. So it's a bit more coarse and feel it's rougher. And then also I've got here an 80 and a 40. So I'm actually suggesting that you could replace that with a 60. And so the smaller number, the rougher and coarser it is. And really all it's saying is that the sort of particles on that, there's less particles on that because they're bigger. So the coarser it is, so they'll have less particles. That's why it's 40 as opposed to 180, because there's more particles. So it's just a way of remembering it. But basically, we have all these different grits because of the different things that we need to do when we're sanding. So let's start with the easy stuff. If you want to scuff sand your piece of furniture, so degloss it, get it ready to paint, and you've got a really smooth surface and you've got no scratches, no little dings, nothing like that that you need to smooth, you could literally start with your 180 and use that to sand, because all you're trying to do is take this shine away and basically dull that surface down, so you can go straight for that. I'll show you the technique in a second. If you have anything you can feel to the touch that really needs some smoothing out, you're going to need something that's a bit coarser, because those particles can get down into the grain and take away more material. So we'd go for a 120. If you've got really deep scratches, you're probably going to have to fill them. I think we said that in the previous segment. But the great thing about the really coarse stuff is that's how you can remove your finish completely. So if you've got a lot of material to shift, if you wanted to sand back a finish, then you're going to go for something really coarse like your 80, 60 or 40 grit. And actually your 80 is probably not quite coarse enough. That's why I have the 40 there. So 60s are good to have to cover both. So that's where you'd go. But of course, that's going to be a lot of hard work to sort of sand it right back. So that's why I replace that very often with a paint stripper and don't do all the hard labour. Now, you might think to yourself, whoa, why not make it easier and use an electric sander instead of hand sanding? That's going to be as easy as stripping. And it's physically less effort, but it takes as long. It's just that you're not doing the physical moving, the sander's doing all the moving. But it does take as long to do, so you have to be patient and you have to make sure that you do it correctly. But the thing to say is, and the reason I don't do this that often with the stripped wood, where I have it back to the wood, is that you have to be really careful with veneer. This is going to go way too quick through something which is not even a millimetre thick. And so it's very easy to, what they say, blow through the veneer and to sort of end up with the bottom surface peeking through. So you've actually gone through the veneer because this goes so quickly. So it's better practice to either hand sand veneers or to strip them, just to be a little bit more careful with them really. So electric sanders are fine, but yeah, just go easy. You need to be really, really careful. So let's have a little look at the actual technique. Now I like to use a cork block simply because it's a good size for my hands. You can get really big sort of rubber things that you can wrap the paper around, but they're not the most comfortable, and they do seem to use a lot more paper. So I use just this, nice and cheap as well, and easy to get hold of. And so I just would take a small piece of my paper. So I might just rip it for this particular. You could obviously, if you've got sheets, you can cut them into 4. Let's move those. I'm just going to start as if I'm going to scuff sand. So this is getting ready to paint. Just move him out of the way. And I'm just going to wrap it around my cork block. If you use a cork block too to do this, you need to make sure to put the chamfered edges at the bottom facing down. That helps the paper go round. If you put the sharp edges down, you'll get little lines where it's got a bit more pressure from those corners. So just make sure that it's the right way around. Wrap it around and just hold it in place. Now you have to hold it with this. Some of the ones you can get on the market actually clamps it in place, so you might find those easier. I just find them a bit less comfortable to hold in my hand and to manipulate. The key thing with sanding, and if you want to get a really smooth contemporary finish with your furniture, is to always do everything in the same direction. So we're going to work in the direction of the grain being the pattern that runs along the wood. So we want to be doing everything in sort of the same direction. If you start to go across the grain, that's where you're going to see scratches, because the grain has sort of like lots of little lines that go down. So when we're using the sandpaper, it actually sort of goes into those grooves. But if we go this way, you're going to start to see scratches across, and that will actually show through your paintwork. When you come to the painting stage, you'll see how thin the paint is, and that's going to show anything that you've sort of done that goes across it. In and down, but not like that, because then what you see there is little scratches which go across the way, which will get picked up by anything you apply afterwards. So we want to go up and down. Now my finish is actually quite old, so it's coming off completely. Really, all I need to do, let's just try a bit here, is dull down the existing finish. It doesn't need to go back to the bare wood. Just so happens that mine's old enough to come off straight away. So you can see the duller surface there. Just also be very careful that when you're pushing, that you don't start to do this. It's sort of a natural movement of the arm, because that's going to cause those scratches. So you need to... The back and forth is okay, just not across the way. You can see here how that's now dull, but it's not bare wood, and that's going to be enough. But what you also need to do is move around a bit and look for any bits where it is still shiny. So I'll just wipe away the dust and check for little shiny spots, because those are the bits where if the paint doesn't stick, your masking tape again is going to pull that paint away. So those shiny spots need to be dulled. So just look all around. So that's the 180. If you've got areas that need to be smooth, so I've got some like deeper scratches here. I've also got a bit of filler here. Then you can do that with the 180. You might need to go a little bit harder, but this is where you might want to go up a grit, and you might want to go a bit coarser. So this is the 120. And that's going to take a lot more material off the surface. So that's pretty, I tend to start with a 120 when I'm doing my filler, and then smooth it afterwards with a 180. So I'll just do that. I'm just going to go up the way here because this is the grain here, and then it goes that way. So I just need to be aware of that. Just using the corner of it there to try and keep away from this side. And I'm going to keep rubbing my finger over it. I would do the same with scratches and any marks, is run your finger over it, and anything you can feel is going to show through the paint. So you just keep going till it feels absolutely smooth. And it doesn't matter if parts of it have gone back to the bare wood, as long as it feels smooth. The paint will absorb there first, but that's okay. It'll all sort itself out after a couple of coats. So I can also go inside, just try and get that shape back. So look at that. There's a little bit of I'm going to keep going until literally all I've got is filler in the shape of the area that I filled, so it'll just be a little crack. There you go. Like so that's nice and smooth now. But what I have got there is quite a rough surface. So what I'm going to do now is finish that up with the 180 to smooth it, ready to paint. I don't need to do as much with this, just a light going over, because you've basically roughed up the grain enough that you just need to knock it back a bit. So I'm just going to go over the top to smooth it off. And that's particularly necessary if you start with something really coarse like this. So let's just get a piece of this. So say I want to take the finish off completely, and I've gone for something really coarse like this. This is going to leave really deep scratches in the surface. There we go. Which when I start to paint those, you're actually going to see those scratches. So that's why we go up the grits before we finish. So I go up to 120, and the particles on this will actually go into those scratches and smooth them out. But we have to do it progressively. So going up just a little bit, so 120, leaves smaller scratches, and then we go up again to 180, and that leaves us at the right level to be able to finish and get a smooth finish. If we skip a step, the large scratches from the coarse sandpaper will still be visible. So we have to do it step by step. That's why they say through the grits progressively to the finishing grit that we're ready to do painting or varnishing or what have you. And if you're wondering about the finer grits, sort of 220, 240 and 400 and 600, they're for after you've basically got your finishes on. So you've got your paint on or your varnish on. They're for perfecting those finishes. So we'll look at those towards the end in the last section. If you notice that you're going through quite a lot of sandpaper trying to get the finish back, and you look at it and you can see sort of patches stuck to your sandpaper, that's what I was talking about in the earlier segment about the waxes that might be on the surface. They start to reactivate and they get stuck in your sandpaper. If you see that happening, you need to stop, really, go back and scrub the surface with white spirit, then clean it, let it dry, and then go back to sanding again, and you should find it will happen. It will work a lot more easily then. If you're trying to get the paint or varnish out of really detailed areas, I don't have very many, but you can take a smaller piece of sandpaper and fold it up and use that in the edges, just using your fingers as a guide, really. As much as you can in the direction of the grain. Sometimes you just can't get in, and let's not worry about it too much, but the bigger areas where you can really clearly see the patination of the wood, you need to follow that so that everything sort of looks sort of harmonious when we come to paint. So I'm just going to hold that the other way and go along the edge like that. Just scuff it out, because these little areas, they need to be ready to take the paint. If you've got very, very detailed carvings, what have you, you could possibly get in there with the sandpaper. You could use something like a Dremel or that kind of thing, like a little nail tool. Or you could put paint strip in it and use a wire brush to get in there and just scrub that out. But be mindful that the in-depth bits of carvings aren't going to get the same wear and tear. What we're trying to do is make sure the paint sticks. So the areas that are going to get a lot of wear and tear, like legs and sides and the edges, that's where we need to make sure that we've got a really good prep so our paint sticks well. So little bits of paper can help. Or if you have got a Dremel or something like that, just go steady with it, but that can help you get into the little areas. If you find you've got any curved surfaces, I've got a couple here, just down the bottom. There's also a little beveled inset edge here. And you're finding the little pieces of sandpaper aren't perhaps getting in there and helping you to sand it effectively. And sort of trying to conform it in there, particularly in that's quite tricky to get in as well. What you could do is use a very coarse sanding pad. So we'll be using these as we go through with our painting and finishes, but this is on the sort of coarse end of the grits. And that actually allows you to mould that into different surfaces, so you can actually push that in and use that to sand. Now, obviously I'm just talking about scuff sand at this point. Synthetic sanding pads aren't quite as coarse sandpaper. They don't cut quite as much. So it's great for a scuff sand. This is like a 60 grit, 40 grit or 60 grit, I think. And obviously in here as well. And also great for wrapping around legs. If you've got curvy sort of cabriole legs or Dansette sort of 1950s legs, that's really helpful for that. But as you can see, it's only scuffing up the finish. So if you wanted to take that off completely, you'd need to go for a different technique. Let's have a little talk about electric sanding, because I know everybody's keen to get the electric sander out when it comes to vintage furniture. It obviously makes prep a hell of a lot more fun, a lot more straightforward. I have also said that you just need to be really careful with electric sanders and veneer, especially if you're trying to take the finish off completely. That's why I go for a paint stripper. But let's have a little chat about them, because they can make lighter work of the process. And you can certainly use them if you're just going to scuff sand the finish just to get ready to paint. This is the one that I used for a couple of years. So it's a Makita, it's called a quarter sheet sander. So basically that is the quarter of a size of sanding paper sheet. And all you do is cut it, literally, for this one. And it fits on with these little clips. Or I use the roll, as you probably saw earlier. Cut it to size, and then it just clips over the bottom like so. And then this one comes with actually a punch plate, so you can punch the holes for the extraction to work. You can also get the hook and loop style that stick on the bottom. So it's a pretty standard kind of sander, about 50 to 60 pounds. It works, it oscillates. So it's actually going round and round, a little bit like an orbital sander. And so that's a really good one just to have. This sort of style, there are other good brands. And then what I would do is I actually link this up to my vacuum cleaner. You must make sure it's a vacuum cleaner with a bag. So don't use your standard sort of Cyclone Dyson style or any of that, because it can short the machine out because the dust gets so heated. You need to use one with a bag that actually takes the dust away from the machinery inside. So that for me did me for 2 to 3 years. So don't feel you need to spend an absolute fortune if you want to get an electric sander. You really don't. And what I like particularly about this is it allowed me to do flat surfaces, but I could also use the edges to kind of get into corners. So some people will have a really big sander, like a belt sander, and then also a mouse or a delta, which looks like a lion, to get into corners. But this is a good all-rounder to sort of cover both. If you're just looking for one, you might either go for a half sheet or a quarter sheet like this, so either a rectangle or a square. Now, a lot of professionals in the industry are now using these Festool machines, and they are fantastic because they come with their own built-in extraction, and the dust extraction is so good that you can basically sand indoors and it takes away all the dust. So they are recommended, but they are an investment, so I don't think it's necessary right at the beginning of your upcycling career. You can manage like I did with something like that, and then maybe graduate up to this when the time's right. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of sort of sanding technique. The key thing is not to sand too fast. You need to let the machine do the work. You don't want to be pushing too hard, pushing it around in circles. And we really want to go backwards and forwards with the grain to a large extent with the sanding machine. So I'll just show you what I would do. that's got a 180 on it, so it's just giving a scuff sand to that surface, ready to paint. If I want to take that finish back and put sort of a more coarse sandpaper on it, this is where you really need to be careful with the veneers, and it can start to sort of actually go through the edges. It goes a little bit too quick, so make sure you're keeping it really flat and level if you do decide to do that. If you are going to invest in electric sander, or you've already got one, it's a really good idea to make a point of buying the interfacing pads that go with the machine. So what you'll see on the bottom of my sanding plate is actually a separate pad that sticks on, and it has hook and loops again, and it sticks onto the bottom there, and it basically protects that plate, which is quite expensive to replace, from wearing away with the vibrations. If you just keep using this, your hooks and loops can effectively just wear away. So we've put the interfacing pad on, and then we put the sanding pad on the bottom, and that will then extend the life of the sanding pad at the bottom, and we can easily replace these. They're much cheaper. But what we can also do, neat little trick, is to double up on the interfacing pads. So stick one to another and then put the sandpaper on the bottom. And that effectively gives us quite a curvy, soft surface to sand with, which means we can go ahead and sand things like legs, curved edges, because it's actually going to form itself around. So it's a good tip to make your sander even more versatile. You can also get, you perhaps haven't got the funds for electric sander, but you do want some extraction of dust because you've got to sand indoors. You can get hand sanders that actually attach to vacuum cleaners as well. You can see that one's also got the interfacing plate on as well, which will help it form to different shaped surfaces. What's also on this one, just to make you aware of different types of sandpaper, this is something called Abranet, which is a mesh sandpaper, and you can possibly see straight through it, and that means you're going to get even more dust extraction. They last a bit longer, perhaps not quite as sharp as a really coarse sandpaper, but it's another option that you might find useful when you're out buying sandpaper for your machines. Okay, so I need to go over all of this to get it ready to paint, so I'm going to finish all of that. I'm also going to do the inside because I want to paint this. I need to give this a key as well. It's pretty rough. I've got a little bit of filling there to do actually. It's pretty rough, but I do want to make sure it's smooth, especially where the glue has been. And I'll also give it a little light sand across these front bars and this bit here. And I actually like to paint the underneath as well, which I'll do when we come to the painting section. I'll show you how I do that, just so it feels finished. So I might give it a little, if it's not rough wood, bare wood underneath, if there's any finish, give it a scuff there as well. So I need to go away and do that. Also to finish off the bits of filler across the feet there, and to sort of tidy up all of that so it's ready to go. When you want to get all the dust off, now I can just use a dustpan and brush. You could use a vacuum cleaner, like so. But that, you don't want to paint on top of that straight away, because there is still a layer of fine dust that even a brush or a vacuum can't pick up. So what I tend to use is a tack cloth. This is in a packet. Let's get it out. And it's like a muslin with a resin impregnated in it. So it's actually tacky, hence the name. And it's huge, and you can open it out if you want to, or you can just use it square by square, but it's actually massive. So they do last quite a long time. Could use one of these across 2 pieces of furniture. You can actually see when it's finished, because it's actually full of sanding dust. And later, as we come to the painting sections, you'll see that these come in useful again. And I do it very lightly because it is tacky. I don't want to deposit any of that on the surface. So I'm literally mopping like so. I'm not pushing hard. I'm not wiping. I'm allowing it to pick up that fine dust that is sitting in the grain there, that would sit between the paint and the surface. So it's very lightly, take all that off. to finish up. Now you could use like a cloth wrung out really well to take that off. That would work fine, particularly when you've scuff sanded, that's fine. I tend to avoid doing that on my sort of bare wood because it raises the grain, which makes the surface a bit rougher. So the tack cloth's great for that. And as I said, it comes in useful when you're painting later, so it is worth having, and they're pretty inexpensive as well for getting that really good surface prepped. And that's ready to go when I've finished sanding that.